She was the only prisoner tied to a post as bait, left to die in the wilderness where no law reached and no mercy lived. Then a Cherokee warrior named Yonaguska took an arrow through his shoulder to cut her free. The Oklahoma frontier, late summer 1867, where the prairies stretched endlessly under a merciless sun, and the land between settlements belonged to no one, and everyone at once. The kind of country where a person could vanish without a trace, and the wind would erase their footsteps by morning. This was where they left Hannah Pritchard to die. The trading post at Blackwater Creek had been raided 3 days prior by a gang of Confederate deserters turned outlaws, men who had tasted war and found they preferred the lawlessness that followed. They had burned the general store, killed the postmaster, and taken everything of value, including 2 horses, a strong box of territorial payroll money, and Hannah Pritchard, who had been traveling west with a merchant caravan that had the misfortune of stopping there for supplies. The gang's leader was a man named Silas Cord, tall and snake-mean, with eyes the color of dirty ice and a voice that could strip bark off trees. He wore a Confederate cavalry coat he had no right to and carried a Colt revolver he cleaned obsessively, as if polishing away the blood that stained his conscience. Not that he had much conscience left. His men followed him because he was vicious and smart, and because crossing him meant a shallow grave in unmarked territory. Hannah had fought them when they grabbed her, clawed one man's face badly enough that he still wore the bandage 3 days later. She had bitten another's hand to the bone and kicked a third in a place that left him walking funny, but there were too many, and she was alone, and eventually they had bound her wrists with rope so tight it cut into her skin and thrown her across the back of a stolen horse. She was not the kind of woman who accepted fate quietly. Hannah Pritchard had been born in Pennsylvania to a schoolteacher mother and a newspaper editor father, both of whom had instilled in her a fierce belief in justice and the power of education. Her father had taught her to read by the time she was 4, taught her history and philosophy and the importance of standing up for what was right, even when it cost you everything. Her mother had taught her that a woman's mind was just as sharp as any man's, and that the world would try to convince her otherwise at every turn. When the fever took her father 2 months ago in St. Louis, Hannah had buried him beside her mother, who had died 5 years earlier. She had stood at the grave with her sister Clara, who was 7 years older and married to a prosperous banker. Clara had begged Hannah to stay, to move in with them, to take a position at the girls' academy where she could teach in safety and comfort. But Hannah had already made her decision. She had saved every penny from her teaching salary for 18 months, had studied maps and territorial reports, had corresponded with the superintendent of schools in Fort Gibson, who had promised her a position teaching Cherokee children at the missionary school. It was dangerous, Clara had said. It was foolish. It was exactly the kind of stubborn idealism that their father would have supported, and that would probably get her killed. Hannah had kissed her sister goodbye, promised to write every week, and boarded the westbound stage with a trunk full of books, a carpet bag of clothes, and a leather journal where she wrote every night about the vast landscapes and endless possibilities she saw in this raw new country. She had made it as far as Blackwater Creek before Silas Cord and his men had torn her plans apart. They rode hard for 2 days into Cherokee territory, deeper than most white men dared to venture, into land that the government had promised to the tribes in treaties they had no intention of honoring. Silas knew the cavalry would not follow them here, not with tensions already high and whispers of another uprising spreading through the frontier. He also knew something else, something darker. The Cherokee had been raiding supply wagons that crossed through their hunting grounds, taking back what they considered stolen. The territorial governor had put a bounty on any Cherokee warrior captured or killed, $50 for proof of death, $100 for one brought in alive, and Silas Cord intended to collect. His plan was brutally simple: tie the woman to a post in the middle of Cherokee land, Wait in hiding with rifles ready, and when the warriors came to investigate, cut them down and strip them of anything worth selling, scalps included. Hannah learned of this plan on the second night, when she overheard Silas explaining it to his men around the campfire. She had been lying on the ground with her hands still bound, pretending to sleep while her mind raced through every possible way to escape, none of them good, when she heard Silas laugh and say that the savages would not be able to resist a helpless white woman and that their curiosity would be their death. One of his men, a thick-necked brute named Garrett, who Hannah had bitten, had asked what they would do with the woman after. Silas had said it did not matter because she would not survive long enough to tell anyone what had happened. They would leave her tied to the post when they rode out. Let the elements or the animals finish what they had started. Garrett had laughed and said that seemed like a waste, and Silas had told him to shut his mouth unless he wanted to join her. Hannah had pressed her face against the dirt to keep from making a sound, rage and terror warring inside her chest. She had spent her whole life believing that education and reason could overcome brutality, that civilization was slowly winning against savagery. Now she understood that her father's idealism had blinded her to a darker truth, that men like Silas Cord existed in every era, and that all the books in the world could not stop a bullet or cut through rope. She did not sleep that night. She stared up at the stars through the smoke of the campfire and thought about all the students she would never teach, all the letters she would never write to Clara, all the pages in her journal that would remain blank. She thought about dying alone in the wilderness, and whether anyone would ever find her bones, or if she would simply disappear like so many others, who had ventured west with hope and found only an unmarked grave. But Hannah Pritchard was her father's daughter, and even in the face of death, she refused to surrender completely. If she was going to die, she would die with her eyes open and her mind sharp. She would remember every face, every name, every detail. And if by some miracle she survived, she would make sure the world knew what these men had done. On the morning of the third day, they reached the place Silas had chosen, a wide clearing beside a creek with good cover in the surrounding rocks and timber, visibility in all directions, and far enough from any known Cherokee village that they would have time to see anyone approaching. The creek ran clear and cold over smooth stones. Wildflowers grew in patches along the bank, and under different circumstances it might have been beautiful. Silas ordered his men to tie Hannah to a thick pine post. They drove deep into the ground at the center of the clearing. The post was about 8 feet tall and sturdy enough to hold a horse. They bound her tightly, rope around her waist and chest, her arms pulled behind her and lashed to the post, her ankles tied together so she could not kick. One man suggested gagging her, but Silas said no, let her scream if she wants, it will draw them faster. Then he and his 5 men took positions in the rocks and trees, rifles loaded and ready. Garrett climbed into the branches of an oak tree with a clear sight line across the clearing. 2 others hid behind a tumble of boulders to the north. Silas and the remaining 2 positioned themselves in thick brush to the east. They settled in to wait like hunters at a waterhole, patient and silent and deadly. The sun climbed higher and the heat became oppressive. Hannah's throat was dry and her lips cracked. She had not been given water since the night before. Sweat soaked through her torn dress, and the rope chafed her skin raw, where it pressed against her ribs and wrists. Flies buzzed around her face, and she could not wave them away. She tried to shift her weight, but the ropes held her immobile. Every small movement sent fresh pain shooting through her shoulders and back. Hours passed, and nothing moved except the wind through the grass and the occasional hawk circling overhead. Hannah tried to keep her mind sharp by counting things. The number of trees she could see, 43, the number of clouds, 11, the number of rotations the hawk made before disappearing over the ridge, 27, she recited poetry in her head. Lines from Whitman and Dickinson and Shakespeare, anything to keep the panic at bay. She thought about her students back in Missouri, children from farm families who came to school with dirt under their fingernails and wonder in their eyes. She had taught them to read and write and think critically, had watched them discover that the world was bigger than their small town and that education was the key to freedom. She wondered if they would remember her, if anyone would tell them what had happened to Miss Pritchard, who had always said that. Knowledge was the only weapon that could not be taken away. The irony was bitter, all her knowledge, all her education, all her careful planning, and here she was, going to die as bait in a trap, her weapon useless against rope and rifles and men who saw other human beings as nothing more than obstacles or opportunities for profit. Afternoon shadows were lengthening when she first saw him, just a flicker of movement at the edge of the tree line. So brief, she thought she had imagined it, but then she saw it again. A shape that moved like smoke through the tall grass, low and careful, not making a sound. Whatever it was, moved with the kind of fluid grace that spoke of long practice, of someone who knew how to become invisible. Hannah's heart began to pound. She did not know if she should feel hope or terror, if this was rescue or just a different kind of death. She opened her mouth to scream a warning, but stopped herself. Something in the way the figure moved told her this was not a curious warrior walking into a trap. This was someone who knew exactly what he was looking at. The figure emerged from the grass at the far edge of the clearing and became a man. He was Cherokee. That much was clear from his buckskin clothing and the way his long black hair was tied back with a strip of leather. He carried a bow in one hand and a knife at his belt. His face was angular and weathered by sun and wind, strong features that spoke of strength and intelligence. His eyes dark and unreadable as he studied the clearing with the careful attention of someone reading a language most people could not see. He was tall, probably close to 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of someone who spent his life hunting and tracking. There was a stillness about him that reminded Hannah of the hawks she had watched circling overhead. That same patient watchfulness, that same predatory awareness. He did not look at Hannah directly, but she knew he saw her, saw the post, saw the unnatural stillness of the surrounding rocks and trees, saw the trap for exactly what it was. For a long moment he stood perfectly still at the edge of the clearing, his head tilted slightly, as if listening to something only he could hear. Then he did something that made Hannah's breath catch in her throat. He stepped fully into the clearing in plain view, not crouching, not hiding, just walking forward with measured steps like a man approaching a neighbor's house. Silas Cord's voice rang out from the rocks, sharp and commanding. "That's far enough, savage. Drop the bow or I will drop you where you stand." 4 more rifles appeared from hiding, all aimed at the Cherokee warrior. The trap had sprung, but not the way Silas had planned. He had expected several warriors, not one, and he had expected them to approach cautiously, not walk in with eyes wide open. The Cherokee warrior did not drop his bow. He did not raise his hands or show any sign of fear. He simply stopped walking and stood there in the center of the clearing, about 20 feet from where Hannah was tied. He spoke in clear English with only a trace of accent. His voice was deep and calm. "You are on Cherokee land. You have taken a woman prisoner and used her as bait for murder. Release her and leave and you will be allowed to go." Silas laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed across the clearing. "You are giving me orders? You are one man with a bow against 5 rifles. I could kill you right now and no one would ever know." He stood up from his hiding place in the brush, his revolver drawn and aimed. His men remained hidden, but Hannah could see their rifle barrels glinting in the afternoon sun. The warrior's expression did not change. His face remained calm and unreadable. "My name is Yonaguska, son of Drowning Bear. My people know I am here. If I do not return by nightfall, 20 warriors will come. They will track you through the darkness, and you will not see the dawn. Release the woman and go. This is your only chance." His voice carried absolute certainty. Not a threat, just a statement of fact, the way someone might comment on the weather or the time of day. Silas hesitated. Hannah could see the calculation in his face. The weighing of profit against risk. He had not expected this, had not planned for a warrior who spoke English and made demands and claimed to have others waiting. For the first time since she had been captured, she saw doubt in Silas Cord's eyes, saw him wondering if this Cherokee was bluffing or if there really were 20 more warriors waiting in the hills. Then Garrett, the thick-necked brute Hannah had bitten, called out from his position in the oak tree, his voice thick with venom and wounded pride. "He is bluffing, boss. Ain't no 20 warriors. He is alone and stupid, and I say we kill him now and take his scalp and the woman both. Teach these savages what happens when they cross white men." The other men murmured agreement, emboldened by their numbers and their rifles. Yonaguska turned his head slightly, looking directly at Garrett in the tree, his dark eyes finding the man with unsettling accuracy. "You are the one she bit. I can see the scar on your face. You wanted to hurt her for that. You wanted to make her pay for damaging your pride. That is why you want to kill me too, because your pride is wounded, and you think violence will restore it. But violence only creates more violence. It never heals anything." Garrett's face flushed dark red with rage. "Shut your mouth, savage. I'm going to enjoy watching you die." He raised his rifle, sighting down the barrel at Yonaguska's chest. Everything happened in the space of 3 heartbeats. Garrett's finger tightened on the trigger. Yonaguska moved with impossible speed. His bow came up, and an arrow flew so fast Hannah barely saw it leave the string. The arrow caught Garrett in the shoulder and spun him backward out of the tree. His rifle discharged into the air as he fell, hitting the ground with a bone-jarring thud and a scream of pain. Chaos erupted. Silas shouted orders and guns fired. Yonaguska was already moving, running in a zigzag pattern toward Hannah. Another arrow left his bow and caught one of the men behind the boulders in the leg, sending him down cursing and bleeding. Bullets kicked up dirt around Yonaguska's feet. One tore through his left shoulder, and blood bloomed dark against his buckskin shirt. But he did not stop, did not slow, just kept moving with that same fluid grace. He reached Hannah in seconds that felt like hours. His knife flashed in the sunlight as he cut through the ropes that held her to the post. The blade was sharp and his hands were sure, despite the blood running down his arm. The ropes fell away, and Hannah collapsed forward, her legs numb from hours of immobility. Yonaguska caught her with his good arm, half dragging, half carrying her toward the tree line as more shots rang out. Hannah's legs would not work properly. She stumbled, and he pulled her upright with surprising gentleness for someone who had just taken a bullet. His face was set in grim determination, his jaw clenched against the pain. They made it to the trees as another bullet tore bark from a trunk beside Hannah's head, splinters stinging her cheek. Yonaguska pushed her down behind a fallen log and turned back toward the clearing. His bow was ready, an arrow nocked, his wounded shoulder bleeding freely, but his hands were steady as stone. He fired twice more in rapid succession, forcing the outlaws to take cover, buying them precious seconds. Silas was screaming at his men to flank them, to cut them off, to not let them escape, but the outlaws were spooked now. They had seen how fast the Cherokee moved, how accurate his arrows were even while under fire and wounded. They had signed on for an ambush against unsuspecting warriors, not a fight against someone who could fight back with such deadly precision. Yonaguska grabbed Hannah's arm and pulled her deeper into the forest, moving fast despite his wound, weaving between trees and over roots with the confidence of someone who knew every inch of this land. She could hear the outlaws crashing through the brush behind them, hear Silas Cord's voice growing more distant as he ordered pursuit, shouting that he wanted the savage's scalp and the woman both. But Yonaguska knew this land, and they did not. He led Hannah along paths only he could see, through dense underbrush that seemed impassable until he showed her the gap, across a narrow stream where he guided her to stepping stones hidden just beneath the surface, always moving, always listening, his head turning at every sound. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes of hard running, he pulled her into a narrow ravine hidden by hanging vines and fallen trees. The entrance was so well concealed that Hannah would have walked past it a dozen times without seeing it. He pressed a finger to his lips for silence, then sank down against the rock wall. his hand moving to his wounded shoulder, where blood had soaked through his shirt and was dripping from his fingers onto the stone. Hannah knelt beside him, her hands shaking from exhaustion and fear and adrenaline. She tore a strip from her already ruined dress and pressed it against his wound. He winced, but did not make a sound. His dark eyes studied her face with an intensity that made her feel like he was seeing past her skin to something deeper. "You are hurt?" he asked quietly, his voice rough from exertion. She shook her head. "Just rope burns and bruises. Nothing that matters. You saved my life. You took a bullet through your shoulder for a complete stranger." Her voice broke on the last word. All the fear and rage and helplessness of the past 3 days suddenly crashing over her like a wave. Yonaguska's expression softened almost imperceptibly, a slight easing of the hard lines around his mouth and eyes. "You are not bait. You are a person. No one deserves to die that way. No one deserves to be used as a tool for murder." He spoke as if it was the simplest truth in the world, as if there was no other possible response to what he had seen. Hannah felt tears sting her eyes but forced them back. This was not the time to fall apart. Not while Silas and his men were still hunting them. Not while Yonaguska was bleeding and they were miles from safety. She pressed harder on the wound, trying to slow the bleeding. "Why did you come alone? If you knew it was a trap, why not bring the 20 warriors you mentioned?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "There are no 20 warriors. I was hunting alone when I saw the tracks of many horses moving through Cherokee land. I followed and found them making camp. I heard them talking about their plan. I could not let it happen." "Could not let you die that way." He paused, wincing as she adjusted the bandage. "Sometimes one person must act because waiting for others means someone dies." In the distance, they could hear the outlaws shouting to each other. Searching, getting closer, their voices harsh and angry in the quiet forest. Silas was calling out that they would find them, that there was nowhere to run, that the savage and the woman were both dead already. They just did not know it yet. Yonaguska listened for a moment, his head tilted, reading the sounds the way Hannah read words on a page. Then he said quietly, "We must move again soon. They will not give up while there is light. They are angry now, and angry men make mistakes, but they are also dangerous. Can you walk?" Hannah nodded. "I can run if I have to." Something that might have been respect flickered in his eyes. He pushed himself up slowly, favoring his wounded side, and reached down to help her stand. His hand was warm and rough with calluses, the hand of someone who worked with weapons and tools and the raw materials of survival. He led her deeper into the ravine, toward a narrow passage between 2 walls of stone. The passage twisted and turned, sometimes so narrow they had to turn sideways, and it opened into a small hidden canyon with steep walls and a trickle of water running through the center. "We rest here for a moment," Yonaguska said. "Then we move at dark. It is safer." Hannah sank down on a flat rock, her whole body trembling now that the immediate danger had passed. She looked at Yonaguska, who was checking his bow and counting his remaining arrows, his face pale beneath the tan, his shoulder still bleeding through the makeshift bandage. "You need a doctor," she said. He shook his head. "No doctor will see me. I am Cherokee, but my village has a healer. We will go there when it is safe." He sat down across from her. "What is your name? I saved you, but I do not know who you are." "Hannah," she said. "Hannah Pritchard. I was traveling to Fort Gibson to teach at the missionary school. I was supposed to start in 2 weeks." She laughed bitterly. "I suppose that is not going to happen now." Yonaguska studied her with those dark, unreadable eyes. "You are a teacher? You teach reading and writing?" When she nodded, something shifted in his expression. "That is good work, teaching. My people need teachers. The missionary school tries, but they also try to make Cherokee children forget they are Cherokee. It is a hard balance." The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire, long shadows filling the canyon somewhere behind them. Silas Cord and his men were still hunting, and somewhere ahead, In the gathering darkness of Cherokee territory lay the only hope either of them had of surviving the night. The darkness came fast in the canyon, swallowing the last traces of daylight, like water drowning a flame. Hannah sat shivering against the cold stone wall, while Yonaguska worked silently to prepare for their journey through the night. He moved with practiced efficiency despite his wounded shoulder, checking the tension on his bowstring, redistributing the weight of the arrows in his quiver, testing the edge of his knife against his thumb. She watched him work and tried to reconcile what she was seeing with everything she had been taught about Indians. The word felt wrong in her mind now, crude and diminishing, like calling the ocean a puddle. Her father had written editorials condemning the treatment of native peoples, had argued that the forced relocations and broken treaties were a stain on the nation's conscience. But those had been abstract ideas, words on paper, moral positions debated in parlors and lecture halls. This was different. This was a man who had risked his life without hesitation, who had taken a bullet to free her, who spoke with quiet dignity about teaching and balance and the difficulty of preserving identity in the face of erasure. This was someone who moved through the world with a kind of knowledge she did not possess, who could read the forest the way she read books, who understood survival in ways that made her careful planning and saved pennies seem childishly naive. Yonaguska looked up and caught her staring, his dark eyes reflecting the faint starlight. "You should rest," he said. "We walk soon and it will be difficult." Hannah shook her head. "I cannot sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see that clearing. I see the post. I hear Silas laughing about leaving me there to die." Her voice was tight. "I keep thinking about how close it came, how if you had not been there." "But I was there," Yonaguska interrupted gently, "and you are alive. What almost happened does not matter as much as what you do with the life you still have." He paused, seemed to consider his words. "Fear is useful when it keeps you alert. But it becomes a prison when you let it replace action. You fought those men when they took you. You did not surrender even when you were tied to that post. That strength is still in you." Hannah looked down at her hands, at the rope, burns that circled her wrists like bracelets of raw skin. "I do not feel strong. I feel like everything I believed about the world was wrong. I thought education and civilization were supposed to make people better. I thought we were progressing towards something more enlightened." She laughed bitterly. "But men like Silas Cord do not care about progress or enlightenment. They only understand violence and profit." Yonaguska was quiet for a long moment when he spoke. His voice was thoughtful. "My grandfather used to say that there are two wolves inside every person. One wolf is greed and cruelty and the desire to take from others. The other wolf is compassion and honor and the desire to give. The wolf that wins is the one you feed." He adjusted the bandage on his shoulder, wincing slightly. "Men like Silas Cord have starved one wolf and fattened the other until it is the only thing left inside them." "Which wolf have you fed?" Hannah asked. Yonaguska smiled faintly. "Both, I think. There have been times when I fed the wrong one, times when anger made me cruel, times when I took revenge instead of seeking justice. But I try to remember my grandfather's teaching. Try to make the choice again each day." He stood slowly, testing his balance. "We should go now. The darkness will hide us, but it will also hide them. We must be careful." Hannah rose on unsteady legs, her body protesting after hours of being tied, and then the desperate run through the forest. Yonaguska noticed her difficulty and pulled a strip of dried meat from a pouch at his belt. "Eat this, you need strength." She took it gratefully. The meat was tough and smoky, and the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. She had not realized how hungry she was until the first bite. They left the hidden canyon through a narrow gap in the rocks that Yonaguska seemed to know by memory. The night was thick with cloud cover that blocked the stars, making the darkness almost absolute. Hannah could barely see 3 feet in front of her, but Yonaguska moved with confidence, one hand occasionally reaching back to guide her around obstacles she could not see. They walked for what felt like hours through terrain that shifted from rocky slopes to dense pine forest to open meadows, where the grass whispered against their legs. Yonaguska set a steady pace that was not fast, but never stopped. He paused occasionally to listen, his head tilted toward sounds Hannah could not hear. Once he pulled her down into a crouch, and they waited in silence while something moved through the darkness nearby, something that breathed heavily and snapped branches as it passed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. "Bear," Yonaguska whispered when it was gone. "Hunting. We are lucky it was not interested in us." Hannah's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She had never been this close to a wild bear, had never understood how small and vulnerable a human body was in the wilderness until this moment. They continued walking, and gradually the terrain began to change. The forest grew thicker, the undergrowth more tangled. Hannah could smell wood smoke on the wind, faint but distinct. "Your village?" she asked quietly. Yonaguska nodded. "Close now. Another hour, perhaps. But we must be careful. There are those in my village who do not trust white people, who have lost family to men like Silas Cord. They may not understand why I brought you." Hannah felt a new kind of fear settle in her stomach. "Will they hurt me?" Yonaguska was quiet for a moment. "No, I will not allow it. But they may be angry with me for taking the risk, for bringing trouble to the village. I am asking you to trust me even though you have no reason to trust anyone after what you have been through." "You saved my life," Hannah said simply. "That is reason enough." Something in the darkness ahead, a sound that did not belong to the forest. Voices speaking in a language Hannah did not understand, sharp and alert. Yonaguska stopped and called out in the same language, his voice carrying clearly through the trees. 3 figures emerged from the shadows, men with rifles and bows, their faces painted with dark streaks that made them nearly invisible in the night. They spoke rapidly to Yonaguska, their tones questioning and concerned. He answered in the same language, gesturing to his wounded shoulder and then to Hannah. One of the men stepped closer, studying her with hard, suspicious eyes. The conversation grew heated, one man pointing back toward the village and shaking his head emphatically, another arguing with Yonaguska in sharp tones. Hannah stood very still, acutely aware that she was completely at their mercy, that she could not understand what was being decided, that her life might be ending here, in the darkness, surrounded by strangers who had every reason to hate people who looked like her. Finally, Yonaguska said something that made the other men fall silent. His voice was firm and carried an authority Hannah had not heard before. The men looked at each other, then nodded reluctantly. One of them gestured for Hannah and Yonaguska to follow. They walked through a final stretch of forest and emerged into a clearing where dozens of structures stood in organized clusters. Some were traditional wigwams covered in bark and hides. Others were log cabins that showed the influence of white construction methods. Fires burned in front of several dwellings, casting dancing shadows on the walls. People moved between the structures, and as Hannah and Yonaguska entered the village, they began to notice the strangers. Hannah felt dozens of eyes on her, saw women pulling children closer, saw men reaching for weapons. The suspicion and hostility were palpable, thick enough to taste. Yonaguska walked with his head high despite his wound, leading her toward a larger structure at the center of the village. An older woman emerged from the doorway, her face lined with age, but her eyes sharp and knowing. She spoke to Yonaguska in rapid Cherokee, her tone scolding. He responded quietly, then pulled aside his shirt to show her his wounded shoulder. The old woman's expression shifted from anger to concern. She barked orders to several younger women who hurried to gather supplies. Then she looked at Hannah with an unreadable expression and gestured for her to enter the dwelling. Inside, the structure was warm and smelled of herbs and wood smoke. Baskets lined the walls filled with dried plants and roots. Bundles of herbs hung from the ceiling. A fire burned in a central pit with a smoke hole above. The old woman pointed to a mat near the fire and spoke firmly. Yonaguska translated. She says you will sit there and not move until she has finished with me. Her name is Awenasa. She is our healer, and she does not trust you." Hannah sat obediently while Awenasa began working on Yonaguska's shoulder. She cut away his blood-soaked shirt and examined the wound with practiced hands. She spoke constantly while she worked, her tone alternating between scolding and concerned. Yonaguska responded in short phrases. His jaw clenched against the pain as she cleaned the wound with something that made him hiss between his teeth. Hannah watched the old woman work with fascination. Her movements were precise and confident, born of decades of experience. She packed the wound with a paste made from crushed herbs, wrapped it tightly with clean cloth, then prepared a tea from dried leaves and forced Yonaguska to drink it despite his protests. When she was finished, she turned her attention to Hannah. The old woman knelt in front of her and took Hannah's wrists in her hands, examining the rope burns with a gentle touch that contrasted sharply with her stern expression. She prepared another paste and applied it to the raw skin. The medicine was cool and immediately soothing. Then she looked directly into Hannah's eyes and spoke in halting English. "Why you here? What you want from Cherokee people?" Hannah met her gaze steadily. "I do not want anything. I was taken prisoner by white men who planned to use me as bait to kill Cherokee warriors. Yonaguska saved my life. I owe him a debt I can never repay." Awenesa's eyes narrowed. "White people always want something, always take, never give. Why should I believe you are different?" "You should not," Hannah said honestly. "You have no reason to trust me. I am a stranger who has been brought into your village without permission. If I were you, I would not trust me either." Awenasa seemed surprised by this answer. She studied Hannah for a long moment, then spoke to Yonaguska in Cherokee. He responded at length, his tone serious. When he finished, Awenasa looked back at Hannah. "Yonaguska says you are a teacher. Says you were going to missionary school to teach Cherokee children. Is this true?" Hannah nodded. "Yes, I am a teacher. It is all I have ever wanted to be. I believe education is the path to understanding between different peoples." Awenasa made a sound that might have been a laugh or a snort of derision. "Missionary school teaches Cherokee children to be ashamed of being Cherokee. Teaches them that our language is savage and our ways are wrong. You think this is education? This is erasure." Her voice was sharp. "My grandson went to missionary school, came back unable to speak his own language, ashamed to participate in our ceremonies. They took a Cherokee boy and sent back a confused child who belongs nowhere." Hannah felt her face flush with shame. She had not thought about it that way, had not considered what it meant to teach children that their own culture was inferior. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I did not understand. I thought I was going to help, but perhaps I was going to cause harm without meaning to." She paused. "If I survive this, if I make it to Fort Gibson, I will think differently about what teaching should mean." Awenasa regarded her with slightly less hostility. "Perhaps you are different, perhaps not. Time will show truth." She stood and spoke to Yonaguska again. He nodded and turned to Hannah. "Awenasa says you can stay here tonight, but tomorrow the council will decide what to do with you. Some will want you sent away immediately. Others will want assurance that you will not bring more trouble to the village." "What will happen to me if they decide I am too much trouble?" Hannah asked, already knowing the answer. Yonaguska's expression was grave. "They will send you away without supplies or guidance. You would have to find your way back to white settlements alone, which meant she would die, lost in the wilderness without food or water or knowledge of the land." The night was long and uncomfortable. Hannah lay on a mat near the fire, wrapped in a blanket that smelled of sage and cedar. She could hear voices outside speaking in Cherokee, could feel the weight of suspicion and fear that surrounded this place. She understood it, understood that these people had every reason to distrust her, that her presence here put them all at risk. She thought about her sister Clara, safe in her comfortable home in St. Louis, thought about the letter she had written before leaving, explaining her decision to go west. Clara had called it foolish idealism, had said that Hannah's belief in education and progress was naive. had warned that the frontier was not a place for gentle philosophies and good intentions. Clara had been right. The frontier was brutal and unforgiving. It did not care about education or ideals or carefully laid plans. It only cared about strength and knowledge and the ability to survive. Hannah had thought her books and her teaching certificate would be enough, but they were nothing out here, less than nothing. What mattered was knowing how to move through the forest without making sound, how to read tracks and weather signs, how to treat wounds with herbs, how to speak languages she had never heard before. What mattered was the kind of knowledge that Yonaguska and Awenasa possessed, the kind that could not be learned from books, but only from living close to the land for generations. She fell into an uneasy sleep and dreamed of being tied to the post again. But this time, when Yonaguska came to cut her free, arrows flew from every direction, and he fell riddled with wounds, while she stood helpless and screaming. She woke with her heart racing to find grey dawn light filtering through the smoke hole, and Awenasa already awake, stirring something in a pot over the fire. The old woman looked at her and said in English, "You have bad dreams, I hear you cry out in sleep." Hannah sat up, pushing hair out of her face. "I dreamed that Yonaguska died saving me, that I caused his death by being here." Awenasa nodded slowly. "This is possible. Cherokee people are in danger every day from white men who want our land. Bringing you here puts us all at greater risk." "Then why did he do it?" Hannah asked. "Why risk everything for someone he does not even know?" Awenasa was quiet for a moment, stirring the pot. Yonaguska's wife and daughter were killed 3 years ago by white soldiers. They were traveling to trade furs at Fort Gibson when soldiers attacked their camp. They said later it was a mistake, that they thought the camp belonged to hostile warriors. But the only people in that camp were women and children. Hannah felt something cold settle in her chest. "He lost his family," Awenasa nodded. "He lost everything. For many months he was consumed by grief and rage. He wanted revenge, wanted to kill every white person he saw. The council had to restrain him, had to keep him from doing something that would bring the army down on all of us." "What changed?" Hannah asked. Awenasa ladled something from the pot into a wooden bowl and handed it to Hannah. It was some kind of porridge made with corn and herbs. Time changed him, and remembering who he was before grief made him into someone else. His wife was a gentlewoman who believed in peace, who taught their daughter to see good in all people. Yonaguska realized that becoming a killer would dishonor her memory, would make her death meaningless. Hannah ate the porridge slowly. It was good, warming her from the inside. So when he saw me tied to that post, he saw a chance to save someone instead of seeking revenge. Awenasa made that sound again, that was half laugh and half snort. Perhaps. Or perhaps he saw his wife in that clearing and could not bear to let another woman die at the hands of violent men. Only Yonaguska knows his true reasons. Outside, the village was waking. Hannah could hear children's voices, the sound of axes splitting wood, women calling to each other. Normal morning sounds that reminded her that despite everything, life continued. People still had to eat and work and care for their families, regardless of wars and treaties and the violence that simmered constantly at the edges of their existence. Yonaguska entered the dwelling, his arm in a sling made from strips of cloth, his face pale but alert. He spoke to Awenasa in Cherokee, and she responded sharply, clearly still scolding him about something. He turned to Hannah. "The council will meet at midday. They want to question you. You should eat and prepare yourself. Some of the questions will be difficult." Hannah stood, brushing cornmeal from her ruined dress. "What should I say? How do I convince them I am not a threat?" Yonaguska studied her for a moment. "Tell the truth. Do not try to make yourself seem more sympathetic or more useful than you are. Cherokee people can sense dishonesty. It's better to be honest about your ignorance and your mistakes than to pretend you understand things you do not." The morning passed slowly. Hannah helped Awenasa prepare food, despite the old woman's protests. She needed something to do with her hands, needed to feel useful rather than just a burden and a potential threat. She ground corn with a stone pestle, stirred pots over the fire, carried water from the creek. Simple tasks, but they gave her a sense of purpose. Children gathered outside the dwelling, peeking in at the strange white woman with curious eyes. One brave little girl came close enough to touch Hannah's auburn hair. So different from her own black braids, Hannah smiled at her and the girl giggled and ran away. Winasa watched this interaction with an unreadable expression. At midday, Yonaguska came to bring Hannah to the council. They walked through the village to a large, open-sided structure where 20 or so people had gathered, men and women both, their faces showing the full range of Cherokee life, from young warriors to ancient elders, who moved with the careful deliberation of great age. Hannah stood in the center of the circle, while Yonaguska translated the questions they asked. They wanted to know everything: where she came from, why she was traveling west, what had happened at Blackwater Creek, what Silas Cord had planned, every detail of her capture and rescue. She answered as honestly as she could, leaving nothing out, not even the parts that made her look foolish or naive. One old man asked through Yonaguska, "Why should we believe you will not bring more white men here looking for you? Why should we risk our people's safety for one white woman?" Hannah thought carefully before answering. "You should not believe anything I say. You should make your decision based on what you think is best for your people. If sending me away protects you, then that is what you should do. I do not want my presence here to cause harm to people who have already suffered too much." A woman spoke up, her voice sharp. Yonaguska translated. "She says that white people always say they do not want to cause harm, but harm follows them wherever they go. She says that even if you mean well, your presence here endangers us all." Hannah nodded. "She is right. I cannot promise that no harm will come from my being here. I can only promise that I will leave as soon as it is safe to do so, and that I will never tell anyone about this village or the people who helped me." The council members spoke among themselves in Cherokee for a long time, voices rising and falling in debate. Hannah stood silently, watching their faces, understanding that her life was being weighed against their safety, that there was no right answer, only difficult choices with uncertain outcomes. Finally, the oldest woman present, her hair white as snow and her face mapped with wrinkles deep as riverbeds, spoke in a voice that commanded immediate silence. Yonaguska translated, "She says that fear makes us weak, that if we let fear of what white people might do control our actions, we have already lost who we are. She says that Yonaguska did what was right in saving you, and that turning you out to die would make us no better than the men who tied you to that post." The old woman continued speaking, her eyes on Hannah. Yonaguska's voice was soft as he translated. "She says you may stay until you are strong enough to travel safely, but that you will not go to Fort Gibson or any white settlement near Cherokee land. You will go south to Texas or east back to Missouri, and you will tell no one about this village or how you survived." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes. "Tell her I agree. Tell her I'm grateful beyond words. Tell her I will honor this agreement with my life." The council dispersed, and Hannah found herself standing in the center of the empty structure. Yonaguska beside her, his face unreadable. "You have been given a gift," he said quietly. "The council could have decided differently. Many wanted to send you away." Hannah turned to him. "Why did that old woman speak for me? She does not know me." Yonaguska was quiet for a moment. "Her name is Adsila. She is the oldest person in our village. She has seen more than 80 winters. She has watched white people break every promise they ever made to Cherokee people, has seen our lands taken piece by piece, has buried children and grandchildren killed by white violence." He paused. "But she refuses to let that history turn her heart to stone. She says that holding on to hate is like drinking poison and expecting your enemy to die." Hannah stood in the empty council structure and felt the full weight of what had happened settle over her. She had been saved twice now, once by Yonaguska, who had taken a bullet for her, and once by an old woman who had chosen mercy over fear. She did not know how to carry such a debt, did not know how to live up to such unexpected grace. The days that followed took on a rhythm Hannah had never known before. She woke before dawn to the sound of the village stirring, helped Awenasa gather medicinal plants from the forest, learned which leaves could reduce fever and which roots could stop infection. The old woman spoke little, but showed everything with patient hands, correcting Hannah's mistakes without judgment, teaching through demonstration rather than words. Yonaguska recovered slowly, his shoulder healing cleaner than Hannah had dared hope. She watched him from a distance as he moved through the village, consulting with hunters about game trails, helping repair a damaged wigwam, sitting with the elders in quiet conversation. He carried himself with a quiet authority that had nothing to do with volume or force. People listened when he spoke because his words were few and carefully chosen. Hannah learned that he was not a chief, but something more complex. A war leader who could organize defense, but also a peacemaker who advocated for diplomacy when others wanted blood. He had fought in conflicts she had never heard about, small skirmishes between Cherokee warriors and white settlers that never made it into the newspapers back east, battles over hunting grounds and broken promises, and land that kept shrinking with each new treaty. The children of the village were the first to accept her presence. They were endlessly curious about this strange white woman who wore a torn dress and had hair the color of autumn leaves. They taught her Cherokee words with delighted giggles when she pronounced them wrong, showed her how to weave baskets from river reeds, how to track rabbits by the shape of their droppings, how to catch fish with her bare hands in the shallow creek. A boy named Sequoia, who was perhaps 8 years old, attached himself to Hannah like a shadow. He had been at the missionary school that Awenasa had mentioned, the one that tried to erase Cherokee identity in the name of civilization. He spoke English better than Cherokee now and seemed caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. He asked Hannah questions constantly, about cities and trains and books and all the things he had heard about but never seen. She answered as best she could, but she also asked him questions in return, about Cherokee stories and traditions and the things he remembered from before the missionary school. Slowly, hesitantly, he began to share fragments of knowledge that had been discouraged at school. One afternoon, while helping Awenasa prepare medicines, Hannah asked about the boy. Why did his parents send him to the missionary school if it caused such harm? Awenasa's face was grim as she ground herbs with a stone mortar. They believed the priests who said Cherokee children needed to learn white ways to survive in the changing world. They thought they were giving their son a better future. Instead, they gave him confusion and shame. Hannah felt the familiar weight of guilt settle in her chest. I would have done the same thing at that school. I would have taught English and arithmetic and told the children their old ways were primitive. I would have believed I was helping them. Her voice was bitter. I would have caused harm while thinking I was doing good. Awenasa looked at her with something that might have been approval. Knowing you would have caused harm is the first step toward not causing it. Many white people never take that step. They go to their graves believing they helped when they only destroyed. She paused in her grinding. You are learning that is more than most do. The learning went both ways. Hannah began teaching reading and writing to the children who gathered around her each evening. But she taught differently than she would have at the missionary school. She used Cherokee words alongside English ones, encouraged the children to write down their traditional stories, to document the knowledge of their grandparents before it was lost. Sequoia blossomed under this approach, his confusion giving way to pride as he became a bridge between languages rather than an exile from his own culture. Yonaguska watched these evening lessons from a distance, his expression unreadable. One night after the children had scattered to their homes, he approached Hannah where she sat, organizing the scraps of bark and cloth they used for writing. You teach differently than I expected, he said, sitting down across from her. Hannah looked up, surprised by the observation. I am trying not to erase who they are, while helping them learn skills that might protect them in the future. I do not know if I am succeeding. Yonaguska was quiet for a moment. My daughter would have been about Sequoia's age now. I think she would have liked learning from you. His voice was soft, almost hesitant. as if speaking about his lost child required careful handling of something fragile. "Awinasa told me what happened to your family," Hannah said gently. "I'm sorry seems inadequate, but I do not know what other words to use." Yonaguska looked away toward the fire. "Her name was Amma. It means water in Cherokee. She loved the creek, would spend hours catching minnows and releasing them. My wife Ayita would scold her for getting her dress wet, but she was always smiling when she did it." He fell silent, and Hannah waited, understanding that grief needed space, needed to be allowed to speak at its own pace. After a long moment, he continued. "The soldiers who killed them said it was an accident, said they had orders to clear hostile warriors from the area, but there were no warriors in that camp. Only women gathering herbs and children playing. Amma was 6 years old. She died afraid, and I was not there to protect her." Hannah felt tears slip down her cheeks, but made no move to wipe them away. "When you saw me tied to that post, you saw her?" It was not a question. Yonaguska nodded slowly. "I saw what could have happened if she had survived that day. I saw her grown up and caught in the violence that follows our people everywhere. I could not walk away. Could not let another daughter die, while men with rifles waited to murder anyone who tried to help." "You could have died saving me," Hannah said. "Your people need you. Awinasa says you are important to the village, that you keep hot-headed young warriors from starting fights that would bring the army down on everyone." Yonaguska smiled faintly. "Perhaps I'm tired of watching people die. Perhaps saving one life seemed more important than all the careful diplomacy that only delays the inevitable." "You think it is inevitable?" Hannah asked. "That the Cherokee will be destroyed?" Yonaguska looked at her directly, his dark eyes reflecting firelight. "I think that white people want land more than they want peace. I think the treaties are only respected as long as they benefit the stronger party. I think my people will continue to be pushed west until there is nowhere left to go." His voice was not angry, just tired, the exhaustion of someone who has fought the same battle too many times. Hannah wanted to argue, wanted to say that not all white people were land-hungry thieves, that there were good people who advocated for justice and honored agreements. But the words died in her throat because she knew they would ring hollow. She had been one of those good people, had believed in progress and education and the power of moral righteousness, and it had taken being tied to a post as bait to understand how little those beliefs mattered in the face of men like Silas Cord. "I wish I could promise you that things will get better," she said finally, "but I cannot. All I can promise is that I will never forget what your people did for me, that I will tell the truth about what I have seen here, if I ever have the chance." Yonaguska reached across the space between them and took her hand, his grip warm and solid. "That is more than most white people would promise. Perhaps it is enough." The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither of them had words for. Then voices shouted from the edge of the village. Urgent and alarmed, Yonaguska was on his feet instantly, his hand going to the knife at his belt, despite his injured shoulder. Hannah stood more slowly, her heart already racing. 3 warriors emerged from the darkness, their faces grim. They spoke rapidly to Yonaguska in Cherokee, gesturing toward the forest. His expression darkened with each word. He turned to Hannah. "Silas Cord and his men have been seen 2 miles from here. They are tracking us. Somehow they found our trail." Fear flooded through Hannah like ice water. "How is that possible?" "We covered our tracks. You said they could not follow us in the dark." Yonaguska's jaw was tight. "They must have found a tracker, someone who knows this land. Or perhaps they tortured information from a Cherokee scout they captured. It does not matter how, only that they are coming." The village erupted into controlled chaos. Women gathering children, warriors checking weapons, elders directing people to hiding places in the forest. Awinasa appeared at Hannah's side. "You must go. If they find you here, they will attack the village. Too many will die." Her voice was urgent. "Yonaguska will take you deeper into Cherokee territory, to a place they cannot follow." Hannah shook her head. "I will not run and leave these people to face danger because of me. I will go to Silas, will turn myself over to him. Perhaps that will satisfy him, and he will leave the village alone. Yonaguska grabbed her arm, his grip firm. That is foolish. Silas will kill you and then attack the village anyway. He wants Cherokee scalps as much as he wants revenge. You going to him solves nothing. Then what do we do? Hannah's voice was rising with panic. How do we stop this? Yonaguska looked at the warriors who had brought the warning, spoke to them in rapid Cherokee. They nodded and disappeared back into the darkness. He turned to Hannah. We have perhaps 1 hour before they arrive. We will use that time to set a trap of our own. Silas thinks he is hunting us, but he does not know this land. He does not know where the ravines are hidden, or where the ground becomes bog that swallows horses. Adzila, the ancient woman who had spoken for Hannah at the council, approached with surprising speed for someone her age. She spoke firmly to Yonaguska, her tone brooking no argument. He tried to protest, but she cut him off with a sharp gesture. When he fell silent, she turned to Hannah and spoke in halting English. You will come with me. There is a cave in the hills where we hide during raids. You will be safe there until this is finished. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. Hannah started to refuse, but Yonaguska stopped her. Adzila is right. If you are here, you will be a distraction. The warriors will be trying to protect you instead of fighting effectively. The best thing you can do is hide and let us handle this. His voice softened. Trust me, please. I did not save your life just to lose you now. Something in his voice made Hannah's protest die unspoken. She nodded and followed Adzila, who moved with startling agility through the village and up a narrow trail into the hills. Behind them, Hannah could hear Yonaguska organizing the warriors, his voice calm and authoritative despite the danger. She wanted to look back, but forced herself to keep climbing. The cave was well hidden, behind a fall of vines and loose rock. Inside, it was dry and cool. Supplies had been stored here, blankets and dried food and water in sealed clay vessels. Clearly, this was a place the village had used before when threatened. Adzila settled herself near the entrance, a knife in her weathered hands. We wait, she said simply. Hannah sat in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the forest. Every snapping twig made her jump. Every bird call sounded like a signal. She thought about Yonaguska down there, preparing to fight men with rifles. Thought about the children she had been teaching who were hidden somewhere in these same hills. Thought about Awenasa and Sequoia and all the people who had shown her unexpected kindness. Why did you speak for me at the council? Hannah asked suddenly. You have every reason to hate white people. Your grandson was damaged by the missionary school. You have watched your people suffer. Why take my side? Adzila was quiet for so long, Hannah thought she would not answer. Then she spoke slowly, choosing English words with care. When I was a young girl, maybe 12 winters, white men came to our village. They were lost, starving. One was sick with fever. My father wanted to send them away, said white men only brought trouble. But my mother said that we judge people by their actions, not their skin. She gave them food, showed them the trail back to their settlement. The sick man died anyway, but the others lived. Adzila paused, her eyes distant with memory. Many years later, soldiers came to force us from our land, to make us walk the long trail where so many died. One of those soldiers was a man my mother had saved when he was lost and starving. He remembered her, spoke to his commander. Our village was given more time to prepare, was allowed to take more supplies. Many lived who would have died because my mother chose mercy over fear that day. Adzila looked at Hannah directly. I do not know if you will ever have chance to repay the mercy we show you. Perhaps you will die tomorrow and it will not matter, but perhaps you will live and remember. Perhaps one day you will have power to help Cherokee people, and you will choose to do so because we chose to save you. That is how change happens. One small mercy at a time. Her voice was firm, certain. Hannah felt the weight of that responsibility settle over her like a physical thing. I will remember, she promised. Whatever happens, I will remember and I will honor the debt I owe. Adzila nodded, satisfied, then held up a hand for silence. Sounds drifted up from below, shouts in English, the crack of gunfire. The war cries of Cherokee warriors. The battle had begun. Hannah moved to the cave entrance despite Adsila's restraining hand. She could see flashes of light down in the valley, could hear the chaos of combat. Her hands gripped the rock wall so hard her knuckles went white. Every fiber of her being wanted to run down there, to help somehow, to not hide, while others fought because of her. But she had promised to trust Yonaguska, had promised to let the warriors do what they knew how to do. So she stayed in the cave and listened to the sounds of battle and prayed to a god she was not sure she believed in anymore, that Yonaguska would survive this night, that the village would be safe, that the debt of mercy would not be paid in blood. The fighting seemed to last hours, but was probably less than 30 minutes. Gradually the sounds faded, the gunfire becoming sporadic and then stopping altogether. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. Hannah strained her ears, but could hear nothing. No voices, no movement, just the normal sounds of the forest at night. Adsila stood slowly, her knife still in hand. "We wait for signal," she said. "If warriors won, they will call. If they lost, we stay hidden until morning." Hannah nodded, her throat too tight to speak. They waited in the cave entrance while the night stretched on, every minute feeling like an hour. Then a voice called out in Cherokee, echoing through the hills. Adzila's face relaxed. "It is finished, we can go down." She started down the trail with Hannah close behind. They emerged from the forest to find the village intact. No fires burning except the normal cook fires. No bodies lying in the dirt. The warriors were gathering near the council structure, their faces grim but triumphant. Hannah searched desperately for Yonaguska and found him standing with a group of warriors. His shoulder was bleeding again. The wound reopened by the fighting, but he was alive. When he saw her, his expression softened. He said something to the other warriors and crossed to where she stood. "It is over," he said simply. "Silas?" Hannah asked. Yonaguska's face was unreadable. Dead. He fell into one of the ravines while fleeing. His horse broke its leg and he broke his neck. The others scattered. "They will not return." There was no triumph in his voice, just exhaustion. "3 of our warriors were wounded, but none killed. We were fortunate." Hannah felt something break loose in her chest. Tears she had been holding back for days. Yonaguska caught her as her legs gave out, held her while she sobbed against his chest, all the fear and pain and guilt pouring out in great shaking waves. He said nothing, just held her steady while she fell apart, his hand gentle on her hair. When she finally pulled back, embarrassed by the wet spot her tears had left on his shirt, he smiled faintly. "You are allowed to cry. You have been through more than most people endure in a lifetime. Tears do not make you weak." Hannah laughed shakily. "I feel weak. I feel like everything I thought I knew was wrong. Like I've been stumbling around in the dark my whole life." Yonaguska cupped her face in his hands, his touch careful. "Then perhaps it is time to learn to see in the dark," he said softly, and before Hannah could respond, before she could think about all the reasons it was complicated and impossible, he kissed her. It was gentle and hesitant and tasted of smoke and blood and something that felt impossibly like hope. When they parted, Hannah saw Awenasa watching from across the village. The old healer's face showed something that might have been approval. Adsila stood beside her, and the ancient woman nodded once, as if confirming something she had already known would happen. The night was not over. There would be wounds to tend and decisions to make about what came next. But for this one moment, standing in the middle of a Cherokee village with a warrior's arms around her and the taste of his kiss still on her lips, Hannah Pritchard felt something she had not felt since Blackwater Creek. She felt safe. She felt seen. She felt like perhaps she had finally found the place where she was meant to be. The morning after the battle brought attention to the village that had nothing to do with the fight itself. Hannah woke in Awenasa's dwelling to find the old healer watching her with an expression that was difficult to read. Outside voices were raised in argument, not the usual morning sounds of a village going about its daily work, but something sharper, more urgent. Awenasa spoke without preamble. "The council is meeting again. There are those who say last night proved that your presence brings danger. That Silas Cord is dead, but his men escaped and may return with soldiers. That the village is no longer safe as long as you remain." Her voice was neutral, but her eyes held a warning. "You should prepare yourself for difficult choices." Hannah dressed quickly in the Cherokee clothing Awanasa had given her. Her ruined dress had been burned days ago, and now she wore a deerskin dress decorated with intricate beadwork. It felt strange on her skin, both lighter and heavier than her cotton dresses. More practical, but also marking her as something she was not. A white woman playing at being Cherokee. When she emerged from the dwelling, she found Yonaguska waiting. His shoulder freshly bandaged, but his face drawn with worry. "The council wants to speak with both of us," he said quietly. "There are some who believe I have allowed personal feelings to cloud my judgment. Who say I risked the village for one woman," he paused. "They are not entirely wrong." Hannah felt her stomach twist with guilt. "This is my fault. I should have left days ago. Should have insisted on going the moment the council agreed I could stay until I was strong enough." Yonaguska shook his head. "You were not strong enough. You would have died alone in the wilderness. And even if you had made it to a settlement, you had nothing, no money, no protection, no way to prove who you were or where you came from." They walked together to the council structure, where the same group that had questioned Hannah before now sat in a circle, their faces grave, but this time there were others present as well. Younger warriors who had fought in the battle, mothers whose children had been hidden in the caves, men who had lost family to white violence in the past. The atmosphere was charged with barely contained anger. A warrior named Shaitan stood immediately. His voice sharp as he spoke in Cherokee, Yonaguska translated quietly for Hannah. "He says that 3 of our warriors were wounded defending a white woman who should never have been brought here. That we used precious ammunition and risked discovery by the army. That my judgment has been compromised by the same grief that nearly destroyed me 3 years ago." Another man spoke up, older and calmer, but no less serious. Yonaguska's voice was tight as he translated. "He says that the white men who escaped will tell others about a Cherokee village that harbors fugitives, that we can expect the army to come searching, that we may have to abandon this village we have built and move deeper into the territory, that families will suffer because I chose to save one woman." Hannah stood, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her gut. "May I speak?" she asked, waiting for Yonaguska to translate. The council members looked at each other. Then Adsila nodded. Hannah took a breath. "Everything they have said is true. My presence has brought danger to your village. Good people have been wounded protecting me. You may have to leave your homes because of me." She paused, meeting the eyes of the people gathered. "I cannot undo what has been done. I cannot make the past 3 days disappear. All I can do is leave now and hope that removes the threat." She looked at Yonaguska. "I am grateful beyond words for what you have done, for what all of you have done. But I will not be the reason families are torn from their homes or children grow up hearing stories about the foolish white woman who brought the army down on their people." Yonaguska started to protest, but Chetan spoke over him, his tone sharp and dismissive. Hannah did not need a translation to understand the contempt in his voice. Yonaguska's face darkened as he responded, his voice rising. The 2 men argued in rapid Cherokee while the council watched, tension building like a storm about to break. Adsila struck her walking stick against the ground 3 times, the sharp crack cutting through the argument. Both men fell silent. The ancient woman stood slowly and spoke, her voice carrying the weight of her years and the authority of her wisdom. Yonaguska translated, his voice subdued. "She says that arguing about what should have been done changes nothing, that we must decide what to do now, that anger at past choices is useless unless it leads to better future choices." Adsila continued speaking, her eyes moving from face to face in the circle. "She says that the white woman offers to leave and remove the danger, that this seems like the simple solution. But she asks whether sending her away solves anything or simply makes us feel better about abandoning someone who needs help." Yonaguska's voice grew stronger as he translated. She asks what kind of people we want to be, people who help only when it is convenient and safe, or people who stand by their choices even when they are difficult. A woman Hannah recognized as Sequoia's mother stood, her voice passionate as she spoke. Yonaguska translated, "She says that her son has changed since the white woman came, that he has stopped being ashamed of his Cherokee heritage, that he now speaks our language again and asks to learn the old stories, that Hannah has given back something the missionary school took away." Other voices joined in, some arguing that one child's improvement was not worth the risk to the entire village, others saying that Hannah had proven herself different from other white people they had known. The debate went on for over an hour, arguments circling back on themselves, tempers flaring and cooling and flaring again. Finally, Yonaguska spoke, his voice cutting through the chaos. He did not translate his own words, but Hannah could hear the emotion in them, could see the way the other council members leaned forward to listen. When he finished, there was a long silence. Awanasa was the first to speak, her tone thoughtful. Then others added their voices. The anger had drained from the conversation, replaced by something more measured. Atsila spoke last, her words brief but carrying finality. She looked directly at Hannah and switched to English. "The council has decided you will stay through the winter. When spring comes, you will go south to Texas, as we agreed before. But you will not go alone," she paused. "Yonaguska will guide you to a settlement where you can start new life, where no one knows about Blackwater Creek or Silas Cord, where you can teach if you choose, or do whatever work you find." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes. "Why? After everything, after the danger I brought, why let me stay?" Edsila smiled faintly, because Yonaguska said something true. He said that if we send you away now to protect ourselves from possible future danger, we are letting fear make our choices. He said that his wife Ayita used to tell him that the only way to honor the dead is to live in a way that would make them proud. The old woman's voice softened. He said that Ayita would have wanted him to save you, would have wanted the village to show mercy, and that he will not dishonor her memory by choosing safety over doing what is right. The council dispersed, and Hannah found herself alone with Yonaguska outside the structure. The morning sun was warm on her face, and somewhere nearby, children were laughing as they played, normal sounds of life continuing despite everything. "You spoke about Ayita," Hannah said softly. "You told them what she would have wanted." Yonaguska looked away toward the forest. "For 3 years I have not spoken her name in council, have not invoked her memory in any decision. I thought that keeping her separate from my leadership would somehow protect what we had, would keep those memories pure." He paused. "But Atsila was right when she said that holding on to hate is like drinking poison. The same is true of holding on to grief so tightly that it cannot transform into anything else." Hannah reached for his hand. "I am sorry that saving me has complicated your life, has put you in conflict with your own people." Yonaguska turned to face her, his dark eyes intense. "You did not complicate my life. You reminded me that I still have one. For 3 years, I have been going through the motions of living while feeling dead inside, helping the village, mediating disputes, organizing hunts, but never truly present, always half lost in the past." He lifted her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles gently. "When I saw you tied to that post, something woke up inside me that I thought was dead. The part of me that believes life is worth fighting for, that individual people matter, that mercy is not weakness." His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "I am grateful to you for that, even if it has caused trouble." Hannah felt heat rise in her cheeks. The kiss from the night before had seemed like something born of relief and exhaustion, something that might be forgotten in the light of day. But this was different. This was intentional and clear-eyed. This was Yonaguska saying without words that what was growing between them was real. The following weeks settled into a new pattern. Hannah continued teaching the children in the evenings, but now she also learned alongside them, studying Cherokee language with a determination that made Awanasa laugh and shake her head. Her accent was terrible, and she mixed up words constantly. once accidentally asking for a bear when she meant water, sending the children into fits of giggles. But she persisted, and gradually the sounds became familiar, the grammar less mysterious. She would never be fluent, but she could make herself understood, could greet people properly, could thank them in their own language. It was a small thing, but it mattered. It showed respect in a way that speaking only English never could. Yonaguska taught her other skills, how to move quietly through the forest, how to read weather signs in the clouds and the behavior of animals, how to start a fire without matches using a bow drill and dried grass, how to find north by the stars and by the moss on trees. Practical knowledge that might save her life when she left in the spring. They spent hours together in the forest, sometimes talking, sometimes in comfortable silence. He showed her the places he had played as a child, the tree he had fallen from and broken his arm, the creek where he had caught his first fish, the clearing where Aita had agreed to marry him. He spoke about his wife now, without the crushing weight of grief, remembering her with fondness rather than agony. One cold afternoon, while they were checking snare traps for rabbits, Hannah asked the question that had been on her mind for weeks. What will happen to us in the spring? When you take me to Texas and then return here? Yonaguska was quiet for a long moment, resetting a trap that had been sprung but was empty. I do not know, he said finally. I know that what I feel for you is real. I know that I want to protect you and teach you and wake up knowing you are near. But I also know that I am Cherokee and you are white, and the world does not look kindly on such bonds. Hannah felt her throat tighten. I know that too. I know that if I stayed here permanently, I would always be an outsider. That your people would never fully trust me. That I would be a constant reminder of the violence and loss that white people have caused. She paused. And I know that if you came with me to a white settlement, you would face hatred and danger every day, that people would treat you as less than human simply because of who you are. Yonaguska reached for her hand, his fingers rough and warm. So we have these months, this winter, this time, when the world seems far away, and we can pretend that the spring will never come. His voice was sad, but not hopeless. Perhaps that is enough. Perhaps some things are meant to be temporary, to burn bright and brief like falling stars. And Lee, Hannah wanted to argue, wanted to say that they could find a way, that love should be enough to overcome the barriers of race and culture and history. But she was not naive anymore. She had seen too much, understood too clearly how the world worked. Some obstacles were too large to overcome with good intentions and determination. Winter deepened, and the village prepared for the hardest months. Meat was smoked and stored, firewood stacked high. Every household checking their supplies and making repairs to structures that would need to withstand snow and ice. Hannah worked alongside the women, learning to tan hides and preserve food. Her hands growing calloused and strong from unfamiliar labor, Sequoia continued to thrive. His mother told Hannah that he no longer had nightmares about the missionary school, that he was teaching his younger siblings Cherokee words and stories, that he wanted to be a bridge between peoples like Yonaguska rather than an exile from his own culture. Hannah felt pride in this, but also a bittersweet awareness that she would leave before seeing what kind of man he became. The first snow came in early December, transforming the village into something from a dream. The children played in the white drifts while their parents watched with tired smiles. For a few hours, the constant tension of frontier life seemed to lift, replaced by simple joy in the beauty of the season. Hannah stood outside Awanasa's dwelling watching the snow fall. Yonaguska appeared beside her, silent as always. He did not speak, but wrapped a warm fur around her shoulders, his hands lingering on her arms. She leaned back against his chest and felt his heartbeat steady and strong. I wish we could stay in this moment, she said softly. I wish spring would never come. Yonaguska's arms tightened around her. I wish that too, but wishing does not change the turning of seasons. We have this winter. Let that be enough. Hannah turned in his arms and kissed him, tasting snow on his lips, feeling the cold air and his warm breath. memorizing every detail, because she knew that memory was all she would have when spring came, and they went their separate ways. That night, the village gathered for a winter ceremony. Fires burned high, and drumbeats echoed through the cold air. Dancers moved in patterns that spoke of stories older than memory. Of the people's connection to the land and each other, Hannah sat with the women and children, watching Yonaguska dance with the other warriors, his movements powerful and graceful, completely at home in his own skin in a way she envied. Ibnasa leaned close and spoke in Hannah's ear. "You love him?" It was not a question, Hannah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The old healer was quiet for a moment. Love is not always enough. Sometimes the world does not allow us to keep what we love most, but that does not make the love any less real or valuable. She paused. Carry it with you when you go. Let it change you. Let it make you into someone who understands that people are people, regardless of the color of their skin. Hannah watched Yonaguska dance and felt her heart breaking and mending at the same time. Breaking because she knew this could not last. Mending because for the first time in her life, she understood what it meant to truly see another person, to look past surfaces and stories and prejudices to the human being beneath. Yonaguska had saved her life twice, once from Silas Cord and once from her own ignorance. The ceremony went on late into the night, when it finally ended and people began returning to their homes. Yonaguska found Hannah in the crowd. "Walk with me," he said, leading her away from the village along a path she had learned well in the past weeks. They climbed to a ridge that overlooked the valley, the snow glowing pale under the stars. The village fires tiny points of warmth in the vast darkness. "I have been thinking about the spring," Yonaguska said, his breath misting in the cold air. "About what happens when I take you to Texas, about coming back here alone and resuming my life as if this winter never happened." He turned to face her. "I do not think I can do that. I do not think I can pretend that knowing you has not changed everything." Hannah's heart began to race. "What are you saying?" Yonaguska took both her hands in his. "I am saying that perhaps temporary is not enough. Perhaps burning bright and brief is not all we can have. I'm saying that when spring comes and I take you to Texas, perhaps I do not come back." His voice was steady, but she could see the uncertainty in his eyes, the fear of what he was proposing. "You would leave your people?" Hannah asked, stunned. "You would give up your home, your position in the village, everything you have here?" Yonaguska nodded slowly. "I would give it up for a chance at something I thought I had lost forever. A chance at a future that includes love and partnership and waking up beside someone who sees me as I am." He paused. "But only if that is what you want, only if you believe we could build something real together." Hannah felt tears freeze on her cheeks. "I want that more than anything. But I cannot ask you to give up everything. Your people need you. Sequoia needs you. The whole village relies on your leadership and your wisdom." Yonaguska smiled faintly. "There are others who can lead. Chitan is hot-headed, but he learns quickly. Awinasa has more wisdom than 10 men combined. The village will survive without me." He touched her face gently. "But I do not think I will survive without you. These past months have taught me that survival is not the same as living. I want to live again, truly live, and I want to do it with you." Hannah pulled him close and kissed him with all the emotion she could not put into words. Gratitude and love and fear and hope all tangled together. When they finally parted, she whispered against his lips, "Then we will go to Texas together in the spring. We will build a new life where no one knows our histories, where we can just be two people trying to make a home in a hard world." They stood on the ridge while the stars wheeled overhead and the village slept below, holding each other against the cold, against the uncertainty of the future, against all the forces that would tell them this love was impossible. And in that moment, impossible or not, it was enough. Spring arrived slowly across the Oklahoma Territory, the snow melting in patches to reveal muddy earth and green shoots pushing through the thawing ground. The village stirred with renewed energy after the long winter months. Children ran wild through the forest and hunters returned with reports of game moving through the valleys. But for Hannah and Yonaguska, spring meant something different. It meant the end of the temporary sanctuary they had found, the end of pretending the outside world did not exist. Yonaguska had not yet told the council of his intention to leave with Hannah. She knew he was waiting for the right moment, or perhaps delaying the pain of saying goodbye to the only home he had ever known. She watched him move through the village and saw how people relied on him, how children ran to show him their accomplishments, how elders sought his counsel. One morning in early March, runners arrived from a Cherokee settlement 3 days' journey west. They brought urgent news that made the village gather in council before the sun had fully risen. Soldiers had been seen moving through Cherokee territory in groups of 10 or more, asking questions about a white woman who had disappeared near Blackwater Creek, offering substantial rewards for any information about her whereabouts. The territorial governor had received reports from surviving members of Silas Cord's gang, claiming that Cherokee warriors had ambushed them without provocation. The council meeting was tense from the first word spoken. Chetan argued loudly that this proved what he had warned about months ago, that Hannah's presence had brought precisely the kind of military attention they could not afford, that the army would use any excuse to push further into Cherokee land. Others in the council agreed, their voices rising in anger and fear. Speaking of families who would suffer if soldiers came searching, Adzila listened patiently to all the arguments before speaking, her ancient voice cutting through the chaos with quiet authority that demanded silence. Yonaguska translated her words for Hannah, who sat at the edge of the circle. She says that the army was always going to find reasons to push into our territory, that we have been losing land piece by piece for many years, that one white woman is not the root cause of our troubles, even if she became tangled in them. The old woman's eyes found Hannah across the gathering. She says that blame is easy to assign, but solutions are hard to find, that we must decide what action to take now. A younger warrior named Kanuna spoke up with a practical suggestion, that Hannah and Yonaguska should leave immediately before the soldiers got any closer to the village, that if they were gone when the army arrived, the village could honestly claim to know nothing about any white woman. Voices murmured agreement with this approach. Hannah stood slowly, her legs shaking but her voice steady. She spoke in Cherokee, though her accent was still rough. I am grateful beyond words for the months you have given me, for the safety and the teaching, for treating me as a person rather than simply a problem. She switched to English for more complex thoughts. I know my presence has caused difficulty. I know you will breathe easier when I'm gone, but I want you to know I will never forget your kindness. Then Yonaguska stood beside her and spoke in Cherokee, his voice clear and firm, carrying to every person gathered in the circle. Hannah did not need a translation to understand from the sudden, shocked silence. She saw Awanesa close her eyes as if in pain, saw Adzila nod as if confirming something she already suspected, saw Chetan's face flush dark with anger. Awanesa was the first to break the silence. Speaking softly but with deep emotion, Yonaguska translated quietly. She says that she knew this would happen from the way I looked at you. That a man does not teach someone to read weather signs unless he plans to keep them in his life. The old healer paused. She says that my heart has chosen, and she will not argue with a heart that has grieved long enough. But Chetan erupted in rapid, angry Cherokee. Gesturing sharply as he spoke, other voices joined his, some arguing passionately, some pleading. The debate that followed raged for over an hour, with people speaking of duty to community and tradition and the needs of many versus the desires of one man. Finally, Adzila struck her walking stick against the ground 3 times, the sharp crack cutting through all other voices. She spoke at length when silence fell, her voice carrying the accumulated authority of her 80 winters. Yonaguska's voice was thick with emotion as he translated. She says that 3 years ago, I wanted to throw my life away seeking revenge, that the council stopped me because my life belonged to the people, that my skills were too valuable to waste. He paused, swallowing hard. Now she says that a life lived entirely in duty without any joy is not a life worth protecting. That if I have found something worth truly living for, the village should honor that choice, the ancient woman continued. Switching to English so Hannah could hear directly, Yonaguska has given much to this village over many years, has put our needs before his own happiness again and again. If he chooses now to leave and build a life with this woman that fate brought to us, then we should give him our blessing rather than burdening him with guilt. Her eyes moved from face to face. I have watched young people sacrifice their happiness entirely for their communities, and I have watched that sacrifice turn to bitterness that poisons everything. One by one after that, other voices spoke, some offering reluctant acceptance, others expressing genuine sorrow at losing such a valued member of their community. When the council finally dispersed as the sun climbed toward midday, the decision had been made. Yonaguska and Hannah would leave within 3 days. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation and painful goodbyes. A Winasa packed careful bundles of medicinal herbs with detailed instructions written in both Cherokee and English. Sequoia clung to Hannah and cried openly, making her promise to write letters, even though they both knew there would be no way to send mail. His mother embraced Hannah tightly and thanked her with tears for giving her son back his pride. Adsila gave Hannah a gift wrapped in soft deerskin. Inside was a small stone carved with intricate symbols, smooth and dark and warm to the touch. "My mother gave this to me when I was young," the ancient woman explained. "She told me it would bring protection to whoever carried it. You will need protection more than I do now. Take it, and remember that some Cherokee people still believe mercy matters more than revenge." The morning they were to leave, the entire village gathered in the pre-dawn darkness to see them off. Yonaguska had packed 2 horses with supplies carefully chosen to last through the journey. He wore traditional Cherokee clothing for this departure, his long hair tied back with leather strips, his face painted with the symbols that marked him as a warrior. Hannah wore the deerskin dress that Awanasa had made for her, her auburn hair braided in Cherokee style. Chetan approached last, his face still showing traces of anger, but also something deeper. Perhaps respect. He spoke briefly to Yonaguska in Cherokee. The 2 men clasped forearms in the warrior's grip. Yonaguska's eyes glistened as he translated. He says that even though he disagrees with my choice, he understands why I am making it. He says the village will miss my leadership, and he hopes I find the peace I am seeking. They mounted their horses as the sun broke over the eastern hills. Flooding the village with golden light, they rode slowly through the gathered people, accepting final touches on their hands and whispered blessings in Cherokee. Hannah looked back once before the trail curved and saw all the people who had saved her life standing together. She raised her hand in farewell, and dozens of hands rose in response. Then they rode into the forest and the village disappeared. They traveled south for 2 weeks through wild country, avoiding both white settlements and military patrols. Yonaguska's deep knowledge of the land kept them safe. He found water where Hannah saw only dry earth, located game trails that led to deer and rabbit, discovered shelter when spring storms rolled through with wind and rain. At night, they sat by small fires and talked about the future, about what kind of life they might build in Texas. One evening, as they made camp beside a stream, Hannah asked the question on her mind, "Do you regret leaving?" Yonaguska was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "I regret that the world is the way it is, that we cannot simply live where we choose without fear." He looked at her. "But I do not regret choosing you. I do not regret choosing a life that includes love instead of duty without joy." They reached the Texas border in late March and made their way toward a small settlement called Meridian Springs, a place known for asking fewer questions because most people living there were running from complicated pasts. It was little more than wooden buildings clustered around a natural spring that bubbled up clear from limestone rock. Hannah went into the general store alone, while Yonaguska waited with the horses. The owner was a weathered woman in her 50s with shrewd eyes. "You look like you have traveled a very long way," she observed. Hannah nodded. We are looking for honest work and a place to settle quietly. My husband is good with horses, and I can teach reading and writing if there is need. We will work hard and cause no trouble. The woman studied her carefully. Your husband, he is Indian. Hannah kept her voice calm and met the woman's eyes directly. He is Cherokee. He saved my life when white men left me to die. I will not hide who he is or apologize for loving him. The woman's expression softened slightly. I did not ask you to apologize. I asked because you need to understand what you are walking into. This country is not kind to mixed couples. Hannah nodded. I understand the difficulties we will face, but we have nowhere else to go. This is our chance to build something. The woman wrote directions on paper. There is a homestead about 2 miles east. The family that lived there died of fever last winter, been sitting empty since. You could claim it if you are willing to work the land. Come back tomorrow if you decide to stay, and I will get you started with basic supplies on credit. They found the homestead as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. It was modest but solid, a small log cabin with a stone chimney, a barn that needed repairs, a well that still gave clear water, fields that had gone wild but could be reclaimed with hard work. It was not much, but it was theirs if they chose to claim it. They stood together in front of the cabin as darkness fell and the first stars appeared. Yonaguska took Hannah's hand in his. This is where we stop running from the past. This is where we plant roots and build something meant to last. Hannah squeezed his hand tightly, thinking about everything that had brought them to this exact spot. All the violence and unexpected mercy, all the fear and courage. She thought about being tied to that post, certain she would die alone. Thought about Yonaguska walking into that clearing, knowing it was a trap. Thought about Awanasa's patient teaching and Adsila's wisdom and Sequoia's transformation. All the small acts of kindness that had added up to this second chance. The stars came out one by one overhead, the same stars that had watched over them through the long winter in the Cherokee village. Hannah leaned against Yonaguska's solid warmth and felt his arm come around her shoulders. Steady and sure, they had survived against impossible odds, had been given an unexpected gift of time and possibility. They did not know what the future would bring, could not predict whether this fragile peace would hold or whether the world would eventually tear them apart. But they had this moment, they had each other, and for two people who had both fully expected to die alone and unmourned, that was not just enough, it was everything they needed. This was where Hannah Pritchard and Yonaguska would build their life, where two survivors who found each other in the darkest moment chose to create light together. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.